Guys, I want you to think a little bit about this concept because it's shifting the paradigm. It basically means to rethink, to retool, to rearrange our basis, our foundation, our framework, everything we're about, because everything is different at this point. So it's a shift in the paradigm. Here's what people don't realize. When the clock actually stops, God's paradigm shifts. And that's a big deal. Let me show you what I'm talking about. As we begin to understand our story, guys, it's interesting as this thing unfolds, all the things that we begin to learn. Because, we're very used to finding ourselves where we hear about a God of love, a God that loved us so much that he gave his son to die for us. I mean, it's a very clear thing. And so we understand all that stuff, but the reality that we miss many times is because when the clock stops, the end result is the paradigm shifts. Everything's different. Look at our story. Here you've got this guy. He was desperately trying to get in. He knocked on the door, please let me in. But the problem was that no matter how he tried to do that, he wasn't going to get let in. If you remember, Jesus' response to him is, I don't know where you're from. I don't know who you are. He even said, get away from me, you evildoer. What happened here? Guys, I can tell you what happened. What we got to get a hold of is when the clock stops, the end result is all the rules change. Let me just show you what I mean by that. Jesus told a number of parables in John 25 or Matthew 25 where he's talking about the end times there. And when he talks about that, he told a story about a king who had given a bunch of his money to individual servants and told them to go invest that money, to use it, to get more money. And when he got back, he'd see how they did. But there was this one servant who just took his money, dug a hole, put the money in the hole, and buried it. And when he came back, he dug it up, gave it back to the king and said, here's your money. I buried it so I wouldn't lose any. The king was furious, ended up throwing the guy out, called him a wicked, lazy slave, because he had not taken all that he'd been given and done something unique or good with that. His point was, you didn't measure up to those standards, and his clock had stopped, and he wasn't ready to be able to do what he was supposed to have done. Right after that, he starts talking about the whole judgment thing. And in the judgment thing, you got the sheep and the goats. And if you remember, the idea is you have the people who were right with God through Jesus Christ, the sheep, and the people who were not, the goats. And when he was sending the goats to hell for eternity, all this stuff going on, the end result is you look at this, and lots of times people go, wait a minute, how can a God of love have hell where people suffer? It's because, guys, and this is key, it's because when the clock stops, everything changes. You've got to understand this reality. Here's the deal. The Bible tells us that as we talk about now, God is a God of love, that when the clock stops, he becomes a God of justice. He's a God of judgment. Guys, because of that, we've got to be aware of that. Now, I don't know what it was like in your life, but when we were growing up, we had 7 kids that lived in our house. We were growing up, this thing right here became very important, our dumpster, because we created a whole bunch of trash. And I remember back then, trash was picked up on both Monday and Thursday. And let me tell you, it was a mortal sin if you forgot to put out the dumpster. Because, gosh, it was nasty. All the trash that was in there. And you know what trash is? Trash is something that no longer has any value and no use. Its time is over, and you're getting rid of it. Guys, this is the story that Jesus was trying to tell them. If you think about it, he said there, when you see all these people coming to the kingdom and you yourself are being thrown out, here's what we've got to get a hold of, guys. It's the worst thing imaginable if we find ourselves that all of a sudden the clock stops. And we discover in the kingdom of God, we're the trash. Guys, the paradigm shifts. When our clock stops, all of a sudden it's a God of justice. And so because of that, we've got to make sure that we are ready. Here's